Dear friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Nitesh Goyal from DAV College, Chandigarh. I am going to present before you the 14th module titled Sources of Data, Secondary Data under the paper Tourism and Hospitality Research. Dear friends, after the completion of this module, you will be able to understand the meaning of data, identify the various types of data, also understand the various methods of collection of secondary data, understand the relevance of review of literature and the method of writing a review. So before beginning, I would like to give you a brief introduction about the topic. Dear friends, once the research problem has been formulated and the execution plan or the design has been decided upon, the researcher is then required to collect the information and start seeking answers to the research under the inquiry. This module aims, or the purpose of this module is directed towards the understanding of the meaning of data and its importance in research. Dear friends, you will also come to know about the different types of data and their sources. In the later part, this unit will make you understand the methods of secondary data collection. So let's begin with the data. Data can be defined as collection of figures, facts, or any other related material that has the capacity to serve as the information for the study at hand, analysis, as well as the interpretation. The researcher must bear in his mind that data can prove its usefulness both in its old form or the current one. Its usefulness depends on the purpose of the inquiry one is confronted with. The main focus under this module is on the secondary sources of data collection only. No doubt, there are different sources of data which can be broadly classified under two heads, that is, primary data and the secondary data. As already mentioned, that the main focus for this chapter or the module is on the secondary sources of data collection. Secondary data is the data that have been collected and compiled for some other purposes by someone else and is used by the researcher for the interest of his research study is known as secondary data, and source of information is called the secondary source. The secondary sources contain previously analyzed and compiled information and reports whose data can be utilized by the researchers for their research work. Published records and reports are not the only secondary sources of data collection. Even the unpublished records can be also used as a secondary source of data. Such type of data sources are more economical and are easier to achieve than that of the primary data. Such kind of data is also available for those research purposes for which primary data cannot be obtained at all. Secondary data can be both quantitative and the qualitative in form. Secondary quantitative data is often available from official government sources and trusted research organizations. In addition, many researchers make use of data collected and distributed by agencies including the Bureau of Statistics, the Environmental Protection Agencies, the Department of Education, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, among many other at national, state and local levels. This type of data collected is used for a wide range of purposes, including budget development, policy planning, the city planning, among others. Secondary qualitative data is usually found in the form of social artifacts like newspapers, blogs, diaries, letters, and emails, among other things. Such data is a rich source of information and provides enriched information about the individuals in the society. The contents of the secondary sources are detailed and diversified, yet certain common characteristics are: first, secondary data is easily available to all researchers and do not consist the hassles of developing tools and using them. Second, the data contained in a secondary source is free from researchers' control for the collection and classification of data. The content as well as the form of secondary sources are not developed by the researcher. In fact, they are shaped by others. Thus, the value of research conducted with the help of secondary data can be useless if it has not been tested correctly. And finally, the researcher has to estimate the time, place and conditions of secondary sources and the secondary data, which is not an easy job. Now, what are the importances of the secondary data? First, it is the basis for primary research. One of the basic reasons to carry out the secondary research is that it paves the way for primary research. It helps in finding out the gaps in research activities which have been undertaken. Second, helps get customer information. It can help define target customers and loyal customers and also provides the in-depth knowledge about the customer preferences and the information on how to draw them efficiently and effectively for drawing the inferences. The third, helps analyze external market. The secondary research helps find out current trends in the market as well as give the competitive intelligence to other private players who are dominating in the market. Fourth, it provides internal analytical information. Secondary data helps to find out where a company stands in the industry in comparison to its competitors. And not only this, it also informs about what customers think about the business or say the company. Next, it helps in decision making. If sufficient information has been obtained through the secondary research, one can easily take validated as well as careful decisions as to whether there is a need to carry out the primary research decision. Now, the advantages of secondary data. First, this method of data collection is highly economical as compared to the primary research in terms of time, money, efforts, etc. This method of data collection proves to be highly cost efficient as it has already been collected by the enumerators or the say other researchers. Second, the secondary data's use ensures the availability of data for making scientific generalizations from the studies. Third, the secondary data helps a researcher to test the findings obtained through primary data. It provides additional data for analysis of primary data. Thus, the researcher need not to wait for the time to collect primary data for the analysis. Fourth, very importantly, the secondary data is easily available and hence less time is required to gather all the relevant information. Fifth, it helps in verification and validation of the primary data. Sixth, it leads to widening of the database as it provides the base for carrying out the primary research. These were the listed advantages. Still, there are some disadvantages. First, the data may not be accurate and reliable enough as it has already been collected without any purpose of the present inquiry. The secondary data availability cannot be as per the research study needs, and it may be possible that available secondary data is not significant. This significance may vary as the time progresses ahead. Second, the data may not be latest or it may be even outdated. It may be possible that available data is not relevant to the current conditions. The third, data may not be reliable in nature as it has been collected by some outside agencies. Fourth, it has a limited utility as it may not be able to meet the researcher's current requirements. And finally, information about the sources of the secondary data may not be available to all the researchers. The secondary data based on the unpublished sources may not be obtained by everyone. Even if the location of the source is known, the accessibility depends primarily on its proximity. Let's now classify the secondary data. As already mentioned, that the secondary data refers to the type of data which have already been collected and analyzed by others. That is, it basically refers to the data that are already available for use by some researcher. When a researcher uses secondary data, then he is required to keep in his mind the number of factors or the sources as to from what all sources he or she can obtain the information. In this case, the researcher is certainly not faced with the problems that are generally arise or are concerned with the collection of the original data. The various methods of data collection of the secondary data can be illustrated under two broad categories, that is internal sources and external sources. First, the internal sources. It involves the kind of data which is already possessed by the sponsor company. This type of data collection is of routine nature for any company. This data is used by the company itself for its internal use only. The data collected by such method is always in accordance with the time and is in relation to the research operations purpose. The internal sources may include the sales report of the company, the financial statements, the customer details like their name, their age, their contact details, etc., the company information, the reports and the feedback from a dealer or a retailer, a distributor or a wholesaler. And it can be the complete management information system. The second is the external sources. The external sources involves data to be collected by the individuals themselves. The data collected acts as a very useful and a meaningful tool for the researcher in carrying out the various research operations. There are several external sources from where the secondary data can be collected, and some of these have been illustrated below, like the government censuses as the education census, the population census, the employment, etc. information from other government departments like Social Security, tax records, etc., the business journals, business magazines, the libraries, and of course the internet. Now, due to the above mentioned disadvantages or the limitations of the secondary data, there is a growing need to evaluate the secondary data. This evaluation involves the satisfaction of the following 5 components. First, the availability. It has to be clearly seen and taken careful note of that the kind of data that is required or wanted is available or not. If it is not available, then one might need to go for the collection of the primary data. Second, the relevance. One of the main considerations in evaluation is to examine the pertinence of the available secondary data to the research problem under study. It should be made sure the data collected should meet the requirements of the problem. For this, there is a need to fulfill the 2 criterions. That is, firstly, the unit of measurement should be the same, and secondly, the concept used must be same and data should be capable of being validated. Data quality. After the data has been collected in form of secondary data, the next step in the process is to have a look at the quality of the data. The quality of the data can be judged on the basis of data's accuracy, its reliability, and its completeness. It is very crucial to go towards the original source from where the secondary data has been collected instead of to use an immediate source which has been taken from the original source. The fourth, accuracy. In order to find out about the accuracy and the reliability of the data so collected, the following points must be considered. That is, the methodology used, the specification, examine the margin of error. The fifth point is the data sufficiency. The research must ensure that the data collected should be sufficient and adequate so as to undertake the study and come to desired and fruitful conclusions. Now friends, we come to the differences between primary and secondary data. It is important to understand the differences since we have done the primary and the secondary data in detail. Primary data refers to that type of data which are collected from the primary sources, whereas the secondary data refers to those data which are collected from the secondary sources. The primary data is also referred to as the basic data, and the secondary data is known as the subsidiary data. The collection of primary data is much more expensive as compared to the collection of secondary data. Now, if we talk about the time consumed, in case of primary data, it takes more time to collect the data as compared to the secondary data. If the accuracy is concerned, primary data is supposed to be more accurate than the secondary data. Now, the primary data are known as the first-hand data or the original form of data, whereas the secondary data are known as the second-hand data which have already been collected by some outside agencies. The primary data are not readily available as they need to be collected as per the researcher's own requirements and needs, whereas the subsidiary data or the secondary data are readily available. Lastly, under the primary data, it is required to take much care at the time of collecting data. That is, one needs to be quite vigilant while collecting the primary data, whereas there is no such requirement to be as much vigilant as in case of primary data. Now, one of the very important aspects related to secondary data is the review of literature. An essential phase of research process is the review of literature. The review of literature helps a researcher in gaining familiarity with the problem and thereafter clearly formulating the problem. The researcher reviews all the available conceptual literature as well as empirical literature that is related to the problem under study. A good literature review first defines the topic being studied and clearly outlines the boundary of the study. Thereafter, the literature is organized either in terms of its relevance, that is, the most relevant literature appears first, or according to the source of literature, that is, the research articles, the books, the journals and other sources. Each literature piece is briefly summarized, clearly indicating the relevance of the findings to the present study. Lastly, the entire review is summarized in terms of the status of current literature and how the present research draws references and then contributes to the current literature. Now, what are the goals of conducting review of literature? First, gain familiarity. The first objective of the literature review is to gain familiarity with the existing body of knowledge in the area being studied. It helps the researcher in gaining confidence and establishing credibility about his research process. Second, to integrate and recapitulate the known. A literature review summarizes the major findings of the prior studies. It provides the researcher with a fairly good idea about the methodology adopted, the drawbacks of the existing research endeavors, and thus identifies the research gap that exists in the current body of knowledge. Third, it provides direction to research. Through literature review, the researcher clearly understands the contribution of previous researches in building of the knowledge. He or she can thus avoid repetition in his research efforts. This will prevent wastage of time, effort, as well as the money. The researcher can use the findings of earlier research to define a new cause for future research. He can avoid making the same errors and walking down a blind alley. Fourth, it provides context to current research. A review helps the researcher to link the current project with the prior research. It helps in establishing the connection between the present research and the existing body of knowledge. The various types of literature review. Now these are: first, the self-study reviews. Now when the literature is reviewed by a researcher with the pure intention of gaining knowledge about a particular topic, it is referred to as a self-study review. Such a review serves the dual purpose of not only increasing the researcher's confidence in the topic, but also in making the reader confident in his ability to conduct the research. Second type of review is the methodological review. A methodological review of making the researcher aware about the research methodology adopted in the previous researches. The focus of such a review is on the methodological aspects of the research efforts made by the previous researchers. The third type of review is historical review. A literature review that explores the development and growth of a research topic over a period of time is called a historical review. The issue under research is studied chronologically right from its inception to the current state. The fourth type of review is the theoretical review. When the literature review is conducted with the purpose of comparing the various theoretical perspectives related to an issue, it is referred to as a theoretical literature review. Fifth, the integrative review. It's a more holistic approach to reviewing the literature is adopted in an integrative review. The purpose of such a review is to understand the depth of existing knowledge and summarize the known facts. Now, how to write a review? The process of writing a literature review is an exercise in converting the raw data into information. A literature review is a complete exercise that includes an introduction, a main body, and a conclusion. The introduction to a literature briefly explains the nature of the topic under research and its scope. The scope is very clearly defined in terms of what is to be included and what is to be excluded. For example, the research topic, say investment opportunities and so on. Then the literature review should begin with a clear statement of what is included in the term investment. The main body of the literature review is the core and it should elaborate upon the following. That is, a historical perspective of the research topic, the various theoretical and ideological approaches to the research topic, the methodology adopted in the research, the main objectives and the conclusions thereafter of the various research efforts. Finally, a section should be devoted on the current research efforts that are being undertaken related to the topic and how they are contributing to knowledge base. The conclusion of the literature review should always summarize the major findings drawn from the analysis of literature, the agreements and divergence observed in these findings, and finally the research gap as identified by the researcher. It is through this research gap that the relevance of the current research will be established. Now friends, it is time to summarize the module. To understand the magnitude of the choices available to a researcher for collecting the information, one needs to be vigilant regarding the purpose as well as the objective of the inquiry. The present module has focused primarily on the secondary data. The secondary data is the data that have been collected by someone else to serve his or her objective. Thus, it is an already collected data and is readily available for use. Such type of data sources are more economical and also are easier to achieve than that of the primary data and also may be available for those research purposes for which primary data cannot be obtained at all. The secondary data can be collected from various published or written or any other available sources. Although it is not very safe to use this type of data. Therefore, some amount of check is required for the usage of secondary data. The secondary data also helps a researcher to undertake the review of literature, which is a very crucial part of any research. This helps a researcher in gaining familiarity with the problem and thereafter clearly formulating the problem. A good literature review first defines the topic being studied and clearly outlines the boundary of the study. A good review of literature helps in gaining familiarity with the subject, integrates and recapitulates the known, provides direction to the research, and also provides context to the current research. Thus, the review must be written very meticulously and with great effort. The conclusion of the literature review should summarize the major findings drawn from the analysis of literature, the agreements and divergence observed in these findings, and finally the research gap as identified by the researcher. Thank you.